Hey, Dr. Fisk. This is our redistricting project presentation, and this was done by my group members and I, Alexander Myers, Isaac Chu, Greg Baldwin, Aidan McManish, myself, Richard Yoon, and Aaron Kalmuch. I'll be leading off with our preliminary questions. First of all, what is gerrymandering? Gerrymandering is intentionally and often maliciously altering political districts to give one party a political advantage over another. So, who is our group representing in this scenario? We are representing political parties in Hexopolis, a made-up city for the sake of this game. In Game 1, we represented the Purple Party, and in Game 2, we represented the Yellow Party. And obviously, these aren't real parties, but for the sake of the game, it kind of serves the same purpose as, in our real life, the Democratic Party, Republican Party, and the like. Now, third, what is the goal of redistricting in this scenario? Redistricting is changing the boundaries to legislative and congressional districts. In our case, since we are representing a political party in our game, our goal of redistricting is to alter our district boundaries to favor our party and bypass our opponents.
Hello, this is Alexander Myers, and I'm now going to be going over our result for Game 1. We were assigned to draw the districts on behalf of the Purple Party, and as you can see, we were successful in that with 6 total purple districts created. So our initial strategy in this was to create just as many purple districts as we possibly could. So this strategy essentially involved packing and stacking as much as we possibly could, and we kept doing this until almost all the squares were taken up. But then we realized that we actually did need to create minority-majority districts, which we had neglected to do previously, and so from that point we realized that in order to incorporate that, we needed to draw some pretty contorted shapes on the map, which we did do, and as you can see on the map, that is what happened. So that's how our strategy changed throughout the scenario. And it basically ended up not looking particularly democratic from an outside perspective, as the shapes were all contorted and it looked like it had been quite gerrymandered. So again, we were able to gerrymander 6 districts for our party, but only one of them were compact, which was not optimal in this situation. So the appeal for gerrymandering to political parties is that it can basically help to swing the results of an election in a certain area by the political parties as they are drawing the maps, and they can give greater consistent control over a region throughout those future elections. So this often, again, doesn't actually change the votes themselves, but instead the way that they're being counted. So this means that a lot of facilities of democracy that are typically utilized by political parties, like canvassing and other forms of voter outreach, like phone banking, are not actually being used, and minds aren't necessarily being changed. They're just being used in a way that benefits the party that's in power. So with that in mind, we were really surprised to see how much our ability to craft maps changed the political power in a region, because essentially all we had to do was take a couple of clicks on a map, and the way that elections were viewed were completely different from how they previously would have been. So obviously it's not nearly as simple in real life, but it still rests on these inherently anti-democratic principles in the drawing itself, as votes are not actually being changed and minds aren't being changed as would be in a democracy, but they're just being looked at in a slightly different way that actually completely changes the outcome of an election.
Okay, so first up we have our results from Game 2 of the redistricting game. This time gerrymandering is the Yellow Party as opposed to the Purple Party. So here's our map on this slide, and then next up we're just going to look at some of the questions from this section. So first of all, regarding our strategy for this cycle, this time around we really prioritized the minority districts, taking care of those first. Because in our original run of the game, we had kind of put that off until the end, and it made us have to reevaluate our strategy. So instead, we began with our strategy with the minority districts, and then moved on from there to look at the others. We were able to gerrymander 7 out of the 7 possible districts for our party, and out of all 9 districts, 3 of them were considered compact. So as for why compactness is important, it's really important for a few key reasons. So first of all, people in the same area will have similar political concerns, such as, if they're living in a place that's affected by recent climate changes or ecological changes in the area, they will, as a group, share concerns that they'll want to have answered by the government. And so the representative can accurately represent those desires if those people are all grouped together as a district. Next up, it's really the most natural way to draw districts, and kind of going hand in hand with that, requiring compactness means that discriminatory or arbitrary district lines will be much harder to create, as kind of the more natural way of drawing districts will hopefully be able to eliminate much of that much of those discriminatory practices. So now, moving on to the last couple of questions, is if we engaged in cracking or packing. So we did engage in both cracking and packing. If we look back at the map here, we were primarily focused on cracking the purple districts kind of on the left and right sides of the map, and then in the middle districts, we attempted to pack those in, put as many purple citizens in those groups as possible. And then finally, given our understanding of gerrymandering, is it bad for democracy? We feel that gerrymandering is very harmful for democracy, as it can really kind of fix the results of elections without ever having to interact with like the true demographic of a voting district whatsoever. So by eliminating a lot of the capabilities of important groups of citizens to really actually make their voices heard and really, emphasize the true spirit of democracy, we really harm the democratic process by allowing gerrymandering.
Like many other states alike in the United States, district lines are revised every 10 years based on the distribution of residents across California. Our state, along with 8 others, have an independent committee dedicated to this task called the California Citizens Redistricting Commission, or the CCRC. Their team is comprised of just 14 people who are politicians, business people, professors, and community leaders alike. With such a delicate task comes a set of rigid rules. Firstly, each district must have about the same amount of people. In addition, all districts must be connected together geographically, but not toward the point where their borders are split, which would separate economic or cultural interests. And before a final draft can be produced, it must be approved by at least 9 of the 14 members. An indecision can only be resolved by revising the map until a census is made. At the moment, California's political orientation is polar from each end of the state. Concentrated Democrats occupy small regions in the West Coast, while sparsely populated East is Republican. So there's evidence of packing along the coast. The CCRC is required to compensate for the inflated population in the West Coast by forming more districts amongst the people who strongly reside with the Democratic Party. And with more districts comes more political leverage. In fact, there are nearly more Democratic districts in the Bay Area alone than there are Republican districts in the rest of California. As an insistently Democratic state, the process behind California's district formation is similar to our simulation. We often found ourselves discussing ways to best orient our region to yield the most political influence of our respective party, something done by the process of packing. So in this sense, we're just as bad as the CCRC, if not worse.
Okay, let's talk about independent commissions. So this first slide outlines what they are and how they would be implemented, and then the next slide shows our group's position on it and why. So first, what are they? Independent commissions, as you can see on the slide, are separate bodies without bias towards a particular political party, and these bodies are responsible for drawing and approving voting districts. And how they would be implemented is outlined in the For the People Act. Essentially, commissions of 15 people that have 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 5 independents are responsible for drawing and approving these voting districts, and in order for them to be passed, it has to come to a majority consensus where at least one member of each party, so that's Independent, Democrat, and Republican, is in support of the proposed voting districts. It is also an additional requirement that there is no inherent advantage towards a particular political party in these voting districts. Okay. So, would we support requiring these independent commissions? Yes. We believe that the supposed legislation is beneficial because it reduces the probability of voter districts swaying the outcome of elections one way or another. It attempts to reduce gerrymandering by assuring that no one political party is allowed to draw voting districts. And essentially what this does is it takes power out of the hands of powerful elites that are currently controlling how voter districts are drawn and back into the voters, because their votes are accurately represented in how people are elected. So that means requiring these independent commissions to draw voter districts is more democratic, and therefore it should be implemented.